I believe over the next 5 years, Bitcoin rewards is going to overtake airline miles as the preferred reward for U.S. consumers. And some customers have, bought homes with their Bitcoin rewards that they have earned. It's amazing to see grown adults flexing on their miles that they've earned when the whole system is rigged against them. We are looking forward to this summer a new product expansion that I think is going to make this card not just the best Bitcoin credit card, but the best credit card in the traditional ecosystem too. So going against the largest players, Chase, Amex. You don't need to put your 401k into Bitcoin. You don't need to, smash buy Bitcoin when you think it's you're buying the dip. You can be earning it very passively, conservatively every day in meaningful amounts on the spending that you've done. Really, the primary audience of people who are buying Bitcoin today are credit card users. 90% of Americans are operating in these loyalty programs. And many of the purchases done 3 years ago, the value of the rewards is worth more than the original purchase price. We're talking about Sailor and we're talking about this thing, but truly the best stories about Bitcoin, I think, are coming out of the Cash App terminals and Steak and Shake. Steak and Shake's in-store sales were the highest of almost any fast food chain in the country. The HODL meme has obviously been one of the most powerful memes out there.
Let's bring it back to Fold and your treasury. You guys stacked a bunch of Bitcoin last year. And then, as you said, you sold some because you have business initiatives that need funding, such as the credit card. So tell us how you as a CEO view Bitcoin on your balance sheet, when to sell, when to buy, and when to fund parts of your business.
So before the idea of a digital asset treasury or even a Bitcoin treasury company, Fold, like many others in our space from the beginning, would have Bitcoin be an important piece of that treasury. So whether it was we took in new funding from investors, we always apportioned a large piece into Bitcoin. Well, why would we do that? Number one, we are here to support and are believers in the growth of Bitcoin long term. We are here to support our customers essentially doing the same thing. And that strategy has largely been very successful for us. In our early days, holding a treasury during bear markets allowed us to tap into resources that otherwise wouldn't have been there. When Bitcoin has gone into bear markets before, it's been institutionally adopted, before it was in the public markets, you would have private funds and venture capital would completely leave the space. And so you would count on having 3 years where going out and trying to raise money was just not an option at all. And for many Bitcoin companies, allocating into Bitcoin, seeing it through a cycle and being able to tap that essentially was the strategy of how you would access new capital to continue to expand your business in the most important time, which is the bear market. So for us, this has been really par for the course. This is how we've always operated. And it is largely the reason why Fold has survived during the worst, deepest bears in the past, but also why we've been able to continue to build through bear markets, which is the most important thing for a Bitcoin company to be able to do. We look at this bear market very, very, very similarly. I think, honestly, when we were back in October 10th was largely a black swan event for us. I think we were expecting there continued to be more of a run. And when that didn't materialize, we had to really change how we thought about our treasury, looking at, hey, very seriously, are we seeing the beginnings of a bear market take form? And so we took a few actions along that course, never doing everything all at once, but as we saw the market shift, looked at our own roadmap, looked at all the investments we wanted to make in our future, we have very hard and fast kind of guidelines for ourselves of here's how much we want to be able to invest in the future. And when the treasury starts to hit certain levels, we have to rethink where we're at. And so that has both allowed us to be very nimble and I think make moves at opportune times. The lucky thing with Fold is, largely all of the Bitcoin that we have, that we sold during this time was all in profit from when our original cost basis. And so that factors into it as well. And ultimately it's just about how are we, my job is to be the best capital allocator to deliver results for our shareholders. And so a lot of it was, when is the best time to make this move? How are we going to preserve the value and the profit that we've already realized on it? And how do we then fund that into the business that, we believe is going to have, provide more multiples on the company than, Bitcoin could ever do itself, just sitting on our balance sheet. And, we were very proud to take these because I think it allowed us to show in a very serious way, we're not here to be a Bitcoin treasury company. And, doing something like we did was very clear sign to the market is we take our operating company very seriously, and we have a lot of big designs and things coming that we wanted to invest in. That's our priority. And that was an important signal for us to give to the market.
And one of those big initiatives is, of course, the credit card. It's been years in the making. You guys are one of the pioneers of Bitcoin rewards, of course, and this takes it to an entirely new level. Tell us about the credit card initiative, what makes it different, and why should everybody sign up?
Yeah, this is, Fold back in 2019, we were, created the idea or the category of Bitcoin rewards as an alternative to cashback and miles. That was really the core product that we offered. That space has since grown tremendously. It has become one of the most reliable ways to get people into Bitcoin or to let people deepen their relationship with Bitcoin. So you don't need to put your 401k into Bitcoin. You don't need to smash buy Bitcoin when you think it's you're buying the dip. You can be earning it very passively, conservatively every day in meaningful amounts on the spending that you've done. And our customers have been transformed by that. And we started with our debit card product, and we have now begun rolling out our credit card, which allows you to have an unsecured line of credit, up to $20,000 today, and be earning up to 4% back in Bitcoin on all your purchases. And so what this does is expand our ability to serve customers who are not just using a debit card, but credit cards, which is really the primary audience of people who are buying Bitcoin today are credit card users. And so for us, this was a really important product to bring to market. And I believe over the next 5 years, Bitcoin rewards is going to overtake airline miles as the preferred reward for U.S. consumers, and that will both be a very cultural shift because today, airline miles are such a deeply held cultural. It's amazing everyone talking about the lounge they're in, how many miles they're at, and really they're all talking about it the same way. A kid would talk about going to the game room to earn points after playing video games, that then they go get, prizes at the counter, and the counter is taking a 50% haircut on all of it. It's amazing to see grown adults flexing on their miles that they've earned when the whole system is rigged against them. And I think Bitcoin ultimately, with the core transparency it offers, the results it's already given our customers. Some customers have bought homes with their Bitcoin rewards that they have earned, makes it superior. And in times like this, our existing customers are using the cards more than ever because Bitcoin is down. That means effectively you can earn twice the amount of Bitcoin you did than when we were back in October. The other side of it is that, in a time when Bitcoin is down, you have a lot of investors on the sideline who might be curious about Bitcoin. The card is an excellent way to say, hey, maybe I'm not ready to go all in my Bitcoin trade yet, but let's start earning these rewards. And that is a very compelling value proposition to them. And so it's a great product to get people into Bitcoin, deepen their relationship. And what we ultimately brought to market is very simple product, one that everyone already has in their pocket. You're just switching it out for something much better. And, we are looking forward to this summer a new product expansion, both for the credit card and our other products, that I think is going to make this card not just the best Bitcoin credit card in the Bitcoin space, but the best credit card in the traditional ecosystem too. So going against the largest players, Chase, Amex, and we'll be unveiling that in later this summer.
Nice. Love to hear it. I've heard you talk about Airline Miles as the ultimate shitcoin, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you guys have been able to provide $70 million worth of Bitcoin rewards to your customers. And if that had been provided in Airline Miles, it would be worth less than 10 million, right? So talk to us about that economy when it comes to rewards and credit cards and how you got Bitcoin in there.
So the competition, so Airline Miles is potentially the largest. So Airline Miles is a very interesting industry. So if you look at all of the airlines, United, American, Delta, and you removed the airline mile revenues from their P&L, all of them would be out of business. They would be nationalized by the U.S. government. And they would have no business model. They would be operating at a deep loss to the tune of billions of dollars. When you add airline revenues into back into it, some become break even. Some, like Delta, have a nice profit. The Delta Amex cashback or airline mile card processes 1% of U.S. GDP on that credit card every year. That one credit card, and all of that economic activity is in service of earning these airline miles. And so what happens is banks and airlines partner up. Airlines sell miles to banks at a steep discount. And why do they do that? It's because they get to recognize revenue right away, and they can deal with the conversion of that down the path. But they can sell them at a deep discount because they know ultimately a large portion of those airline miles earned will never be used for anything. And when they are used, they control how they are used. So, there is a conversion applied to an airline seat, or buying some product with it, or upgrading, or accessing a lounge. All of these is taking more and more and more margin. So much so that the customer ultimately is going to be receiving cents on the dollar of the perceived value of these miles. And with the expansion of that, these programs hold hundreds of billions trapped in these programs overall. And most of them will never go. So on the airlines, you see massive liabilities, but you also see the revenues that are coming in from this. And so for Fold, we really looked at this system and said, this is an effect of, this is like hyper-fiat. This is a money printer that has been created by a partnership between banks who can't just print dollars, but now they can print something even more that they have even more control over. And ultimately you see that printing results in about an inflation rate of about 15 to 20% on airline miles per year. So now they don't get the inflation rate of, fiat of whatever that is. Now they get an inflation rate that's much higher, and they have much more ability to do. And it has become so acute that the airlines came under massive investigation because from the Department of Transportation, and the argument was Americans now are using airline miles as essentially another savings account that they have, which is great. That's what we believe. Rewards should build savings. But Americans are doing that because they have no excess dollars to, give their family vacation. So they use the airlines essentially as a savings account to build towards that goal. And as they're building towards that goal, they are inflating and creating more barriers to the conversion of those airline miles that essentially are eroding those savings that those Americans are doing. So they all came under massive investigation for this, of essentially creating an unfair environment for Americans that now, 90% of Americans are operating in these loyalty programs. So it's a reflection of how deeply difficult the economy is today, that Americans are actually relying on a funny money point system as a core piece of their savings. But also it is gotten so acute that the government has essentially stepped in to make a change. So we look at this and saying, well, as a Bitcoiner, the fiat system is very, very difficult itself and creates these strange incentives. But if you look at airline miles or these other forms of loyalty points, it's hyper-fiat. And if we can bring Bitcoin to this environment that is transparent, cannot be devalued, actually build savings, have a track record of doing so, we have an unfair advantage here. At a certain point, the transparency, the trust in these programs are eroding. What we see across the board, trust in financial systems are eroding, trust in, pretty much all institutions today are at an all-time low in terms of how people trust. And so one of the major competitive advantages that Bitcoin can bring, besides number go up, is trust to these systems, where you can plainly show how it operates here and how you are structurally unable to do that with your system. And that provides a value proposition of trust that just doesn't exist in the, in the competition. And so bringing Bitcoin was not just an interesting way of, giving people an easier way to access Bitcoin. It was actually an arbitrage against broken systems that are largely done when people have the ability to inflate and devalue at will, which is something that in a time when people are increasingly on the edge of holding on to their value and figuring out how to do so becomes hyper important. And so for us, it is both many of our customers have more money in their Bitcoin rewards accounts than their savings accounts. It's also as much of you can trust this system more than you can trust the alternative here. And Bitcoin, has created that.
Man, that is such an mind-blowing story. Like, you guys need a whole entire campaign just based on that airline miles are a scam. Just lead with that, because I don't think anybody really knows how much they're getting stolen from by trying to rack up all these miles over the years. That's really so crazy. But you also mentioned how rewards are the most perfect product for this K-shaped economy that we find ourselves in, right? Both the luxury end and the lower class who are trying to get by can really value these rewards. Talk about that.
So one of the things that we've seen, just we could talk about Bitcoin being a hedge against inflation, but it's interesting when you're running a company, when you get to actually see how people are using these things. And when you see K-shaped economy, you have these two extremes on both sides, and the middle is kind of getting bottomed out. Now, the side of the curve that is struggling, has less to spend, but is spending a lot, is spending the majority of what comes in immediately is going out. A lot of that is because of where inflation is at and where earnings are at. The fact that inflation continues to outpace the earning power of people, and earning Bitcoin rewards. The interesting thing is, you go look at our data, and many of the purchases done 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago on our platform are now effectively at a 50% discount or 100% discount in many cases, where the value of the rewards is worth more than the original purchase price. And when you think about that, that not only evaporates the effect of inflation, but it also retroactively builds purchasing power in a way that just doesn't exist anywhere else, because people are earning an asset that has upside, but it, more than anything, is not being incessantly eroded by inflationary powers. And so on one side, it builds purchasing power to the community of people that needs that the most. And on the other side of the curve, they understand more than anyone the reason why they're on the higher end of the K-shaped curve is because they own assets. And one of the things that people are converging on is that you need to hold assets. And so every piece of your, whether it is savings, is going directly into the stock market, is going directly into hard assets, is going directly into Bitcoin. Everything of the benefit of their spending should also go into assets. So it becomes part of, where they look to play, the choices they make as a consumer becomes very obvious. The idea of the ruse of a airline mile is much harder for them to get lost in. Where the airline miles were king was that thick middle where people, that is now being evacuated. Both they were a little bit less affected by inflation. They were also at the same time not earning enough to be moving into hard assets or had the understanding to. So it really speaks to both of the curves that are essentially driving the economy today. And it helps them in very different ways, either at one point increasing purchasing power, on the other side, building savings in hard assets. Because what we see is a lot of the rewards on one side actually just get spent. They'll go in and they will put more groceries on the table, or they will help pay a bill when it was needed most. On the other side, it's being saved, it's going to cold storage, and it's just in line with their view on what their financial activity should create. And it should create exposure to assets that continue to appreciate, because holding fiat, holding airline miles is that melting ice cube, and that's what they're trying to escape. And so it's very interesting as one solution can speak so directly to both sides of the K curve. And it's why, Fold today, you can see it in our products. We have a debit card, which, there's no credit score that's required. Anybody can use it. That's been very popular. It's the highest rewarding debit card in the market today. That speaks to one side of the curve, and you have the other side with the credit card that we just released that speaks to the other side that does have, credit worthiness. And Fold is trying to speak to both because Bitcoin is a solution for them both.
And when we're talking about credit cards and debit cards, it's all about payments. And one of the biggest stories, I think you agree, of the last year is the transformation of Bitcoin payments in America when it comes to the Square terminals, as well as Stake and Shake integrating Bitcoin. And you work closely with Stake and Shake. Tell us about that relationship between the two companies.
There was a time when I believe it was, Zappos or Microsoft years and years ago announced we are accepting Bitcoin. And Bitcoin alone would jump 10% on that news. It was such a nascent time for the market where something like that could actually move the market. Almost inevitably, a year, 2 years later, they would quietly remove their Bitcoin payments systems. And the reason was twofold. Number one, the amount of people looking to spend their Bitcoin was so minimal, but also there was complexity and operational overhead of managing this other system on the side that was breaking. It wasn't great. And so inevitably they were canned. And I think it is such an incredible, I think some of the best stories in Bitcoin, largely, we're talking about Sailor and we're talking about all these things, but truly the best stories about Bitcoin, I think, are coming out of the Cash App terminals and Stake and Shake, because it is a reflection of the moving beyond that kind of time that we were in, where the technology wasn't good enough and there wasn't enough people wanting to spend. What we are seeing now is that reversal, is that not only is there enough demand that will have these rollouts not only started, because Cash App's terminals started in very small incremental ways. At first the merchant had to elect to accept Bitcoin. They have now made the decision that the customer accepts whether they want to pay in Bitcoin, and in the back end they'll settle in dollars with the merchant. So what they've shown is that there is demand now. There's enough people holding Bitcoin and using it that makes a real difference. Stake and Shake's in-store sales were the highest of almost any fast food chain in the country, going from one of the oldest, but one of the least well-known chains to now completely reversing the fate of their company. So much so that they've embraced Bitcoin in all of these different ways, whether it's, they work with us to give bonuses to their hourly workers, 21 cents every hour the hourly workers get in Bitcoin, or to give essentially a happy meal to people coming to buy their burgers, where you buy their burger and then you'll get Bitcoin as well as a prize. Fold has powers that for both of them, but they've really embraced it, not necessarily from a number go up standpoint, but just from this is helping our business in these core ways, whether it's tapping into a new community of people that is a great new customer base, or it is, better margins, faster payments, a better ability to recruit and retain employees. Bitcoin as this interesting tool to incrementally improve your business versus the full number go up. And you can see that if you go on Steak and Shake's Twitter today, or X today, they're not shying away because Bitcoin is in a bear market. In fact, they are out there being louder than ever saying Bitcoin payments have fundamentally changed our business. Faster payments, lower or higher margin for us. Cash App has done the same a lot with their merchants. And I think it is probably the most true, real progress that we've seen in Bitcoin today that is largely overshadowed by all the Bitcoin treasuries and all the other stuff going on. It's probably the best and brightest thing that we've seen, this integration deeply into everyday life that is being supported by real life demand for that. It is not an artificial, let's push Bitcoin on everyone and see how it works. We already went through that phase. We are now at a phase where Bitcoin is broken out. And so I think those stories where if you want to, get away from the poor sentiment on in our spaces, that's where you really want to look at the signal.
100%. And one thing I really value about you is you have a very healthy relationship with Bitcoin in the sense that you don't care about the total number of Bitcoin, say your company holds. It's what Bitcoin enables for you and your life. So talk about that mental relationship you've had with Bitcoin over the years and give some solace to the people that are dealing with this brutal bear market right now.
I think the HODL meme it has obviously been one of the most powerful memes out there. And I think why it is powerful is not the idea of hodling to your grave, but it is about changing your time preference, and that looking at participating in this asset and to get the benefits of this asset requires a longer time preference than you are typically asked from or typically set up to expect from the rest of the world. This is not a trade in and out and your life has changed. HODL is really about change your time preference. And at the end of the day, change your time preference to unlock the life that you want to live. And I think where HODL gets a little bit perverted or deranged is this, take it to your grave. Michael Saylor famously said, "I'm taking my keys to my grave, and that's my gift back to the network." And that's probably fine if you're already a fiat billionaire to have that mentality. But for all of our customers, for myself, the only bank account that I have is Fold. My exposure to Bitcoin is about as much as you can get from my business to my personal investment. This is where I've chosen to build my life. And again, I've been doing that through bull and bear markets for a long time. And what has been always clear is that, we're here to live the life we want to, and Bitcoin is a tool to unlock that. The only thing it asks is for a longer time preference. And so you need to structure your life in a way that allows for that time preference to come to fruition. Never have a business or a life that is absolutely requires Bitcoin to go up. That is the position you're gonna get wrecked in. But I see Bitcoin as enabling a better life for, my two kids, my wife, my family, my friends, my experience of life. And it is not about hodling to the grave. It's about strategically, it's about deeply embracing the idea of a low time preference and building quality things that last in the future that can support that life that you have. And Bitcoin in that world is something that you use. It is something that it unlocks things. It is not a thing that you hold forever. And it is not necessarily a thing you just hold and put more and more leverage on it with loans. I'm a deep believer in actually using Bitcoin as currency in smart ways. And I think there are great uses for some of those other tools. But at the end of the day, Fold, my family, our customers, has lived in, I think, a parallel universe from what a lot of the media talks about today of, families, people not starting families because they feel like they're economically unstable, or not accessing home ownership, or not starting that business or taking that chance. A lot of things that I believe are core to the American experience are being essentially thought of as being too expensive, or things that you have to put off into the future. And Bitcoin has unlocked that for thousands of our customers in ways that if they did not have Bitcoin, or they did not have Fold in that way, they would be living a very different life. And so I am both emboldened by the narrative, the rhetoric, the vision of this, what I'm saying, but this is all backed up by real life-changing stories of our customers, their families, their businesses. And it's one I can echo myself with Fold and my family. And that does require selling Bitcoin here, and it does require buying Bitcoin. I'm ultimately a net buyer. But at the same time, Bitcoin is here to unlock the life you want to live. The end goal is not Bitcoin.
I think that's a great message to end on. Will, thank you so much for your time. If people want to find out more about Fold and the big announcements coming this summer, where should they go?
Always on X at Fold_app. And you can also find me at Will Reeves, and send me questions, whether it's about the product, about the industry. I'm fairly active on there, and love mixing it up with the community. So we're open, and it will be a very fun summer for Fold.
How many apps does it take to manage your Bitcoin? One to buy, one to send, one for Lightning, and another for loans. That's a lot of friction. Well, now there's Rhino. Listen to the end, and I'll tell you how they'll set you up with $10 of free Bitcoin. Rhino is a next-generation Bitcoin app that makes living on Bitcoin easy. At Rhino, you can buy Bitcoin with zero fees. Get a Bitcoin-backed loan right in the app. Move cash globally over Bitcoin rails fast and easy. Automate your stacking with a DCA plan, so your stack is growing, whether the market is up, down, or you're touching grass. And it doesn't stop there. Bill pay, debit and credit cards, as well as retirement accounts are all coming soon. At Rhino, your Bitcoin is never rehypothecated. Security comes first, with biometric verification, 24/7 fraud protection, and the ability to move your Bitcoin to self-custody whenever you're ready. Click the link below in the description and download Rhino for iOS or Android. Use code Bitcoin News and Rhino will drop you $10 of free Bitcoin right into your wallet to start you on your stacking journey. Get the most Bitcoin for your dollar with Rhino.